Hi, I'm Andy Power and today I'm going to show you how to catch carp in the cold. So today you join me at the cold and windy, beautiful Todber Manor Fisheries in Dorset. It's a place I fish quite a bit in the winter. I've got a winter league here at the minute and the fishing can be really great in the winter even when it's really cold. But today I want to run you through a few different tactics and baits to help you catch fish in the cold when it's quite miserable, to be honest. Sometimes the sun's out at the minute, but hopefully we can catch a few fish, give you a few hints and tips and have a nice day. So before we get fishing and catching a few fish, let's run you through the baits and tackle that I'm going to use today. Right, I'm going to run you through today's bait selection for winter carp fishing. Keep it really simple. Firstly, on the pole line, I've got two baits with me, meat and corn. See, these lakes have got a lot of silverfish in and I don't really want to catch them, and by using big baits like meat and corn, I'm going to target those better carp. When I turn up to a lake, I look at the sort of water clarity and how clear the water is. If it's clear, then corn can be a really good bait because it's visual, fish can find it and see it really easy. Likewise, if it's coloured, then a smellier bait like meat can be really good. It's really lightweight, it wafts around and it's easy for them to eat. The key with this though is not to feed too much because it's quite a high protein sort of bait. And, a lot of the time I'm sort of tapping in maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces and waiting for a bite. So not to feed too much of that. I might even mix the two together. Today it might be good to mix the two together, but we'll have to have a little mixing bowl and play it by ear and see how it goes. Also for the bomb line, when the fish are sort of backing off a bit further, I've got a few hook bait options. I've got meat again, but this time I've got some flavoured and coloured meat. Like today it's really coloured, this water, so having a really bright visual bait can be really good, and I've caught loads on yellow and pink meat. Funnily enough, it looks like nothing that's natural for them to eat, but it just works. So to do that, I've soaked it overnight with some haze. Got some Power Scopex one there and a fluoro and I think a chocolate orange one, just to try a few options. Sometimes one colour works better than others. Also I've got the trusty bomb and bread. Again, that's better when it's a bit clearer, but I've got an island there so they might be sitting off the bottom. And with that I just keep it in my punch kit. It's wet, miserable and drizzly today like any old winter session, so that keeps it nice and dry in there. And then if the fish are feeding a bit better, then I've also got the option of fishing a method feeder, and for that I've got some 2mm Fin Perfect pellets there with a few upbait options. Got some mini band and micro can't even get it out, micro band and wafters there. So I've got a few colours to try, and I can swap and change, maybe put a grain of corn on if it's fishing a bit better. So nice and simple, that's my bait options. Hopefully they work today. Right, I'm going to run you through the tackle for today. First of all, I'll set up a short pole line. On this peg, it actually drops away quite quickly, sort of 3-4 metres out, and then it's into the silt. But normally I look to try and fish on that harder bottom because it's nice and cleaner. On this peg, what I've done, because I can't do that, I've chosen to fish about 5 metres away from me. Obviously it's winter time, they're not going to come right in close, so we're 5 metres away from me on that line. Hopefully we'll get a few bites there straight away. I've opted for a 13 hollow elastic, still a reasonable sort of elastic. I might drop down to 11, but I think the fishing's still quite reasonable at the minute. I've got 017 power line as main line, obviously nice and durable. Hopefully we'll catch a few fish. I've got a back shot of 2 number 8s, it's quite blustery. This venue in particular is quite open and exposed, so that helps to keep the rig still. I've got it set about halfway between the tip and the float at the minute, but I could play around with it, maybe spread it out a little bit just to keep the float steady. And for the float, on this line I've got a 4x12 F1 maggot, reasonably light float because we're quite sheltered here today, so I should be able to get away with that. And then all I've done at the minute, I've got a bulk and 3 droppers, 3 number 10s, but I can swap and change that again. if I'm getting a few bites on a drop, I can spread it out. If I'm catching lots of fish, I can bulk it down. But at the minute, just bulking 3 droppers and we can see how it's fishing on the day. Hook length, I've got 0.13 with a 16 GPMB hook, and I'll swap between a 16 and a 14. It might seem quite big, but the baits I'm using, I can bury it inside that bait quite easily, and fishing a slightly bigger hook just helps prevent hook losses. And then I've also got the longer line in case the fish are a bit harder to catch and further out a little bit. I mean, especially when you're on your own in the middle of winter, like I am today. There's a couple of anglers, but when you're on your own, the fish tend to back off because they're not really moving around them as much. They sort of stay away from you. In a match, it can be a bit different because they're sort of moving around and pushing away from other anglers as well. But today, this longer line might come into play a bit more, as well as the bomb, which I'll come on to. But for this line, it's the same again, but I've stepped it up to a 414 because it's a bit more windier out there and I'm expecting a bit more tow. So there's my pole rigs. I've also got a rod set up. It's a 10-foot Superior, obviously short chucks. I'm not chucking far. It's nice and soft for these carp in winter. So that's the rod choice. Reel line is 6 pound sinking feeder mono. Sinks reasonably well in winter, especially when it's windy. You need to get that line down and fishing as soon as you can. And then I've got a ICM system, so I can swap between. This is a 10-gram bomb at the minute, but if I think the fish are coming to a bit more bait, I can swap to an ICM method feeder. These come in 28 gram and 16. I'll probably use a 28 because that shelf is a little bit steep over there on the far bank if I do fish tight, so that'll help pin it on the bottom. And then hook lengths, again, I've got a Corman quick change bead and I can swap and change. If I am on the method, I could put a 3 or 4 inch hook length on with 0.11, 0.13, depending on how it's fishing, and a 16 sort of GPMB hook, maybe step it up to a KKH if there are bigger fish. On this, I've got set up for fishing meat at the minute, so I've got a sort of 12-inch hook length of 0.15. I've got a 16 GPMB hook with a hair that's probably about 15 mil. Like a reasonably long hair. I mean, on that I'll probably put a 7 mil piece of meat on that. Maybe try a few bigger pieces, but that longer hair just ensures that you hook them in the front of the mouth where you get a decent hook hold. Likewise with the bread, I'll fish an either longer hair, maybe sort of as long as 20 or 25 mil off the back of the hook. The bread will expand and you don't really want that hook point mass. So with the bread, I'll probably fish 2 pieces of Warburtons, nice and tacky bread, and that will expand a really long way. It's surprising how much it expands, so it's really important to have that longer hair. So that's it, really simple, 1 rod, but I can swap and change and fish multiple tactics, even a maggot feeder if I wanted to, but kept it really simple today. Bomb and a method feeder, and hopefully it works. Right, to start the session, what I'm going to do is start on my short line. Obviously it's middle of winter, this might not work at all, but if there are a few fish close to me, I want to be able to catch them before they move out. So all I'm going to do is slipping on a nice cube of meat, 7 mil. I'm going to put 3 or 4 pieces of meat in my pot. Got the smallest cab pot on there. I'm going to ship out and see if there's a few fish in the area. Obviously if this is a match, then I wouldn't want to really go to my furthest point and scare all the fish away. I want to start short, cautiously. Just tip those pieces of meat over and lay it in. Start short, cautiously, catch what I can, and then move out. And hopefully the last hour or so, if they do start feeding, I can catch short again. But just by starting short, I can look at other anglers. You know, if they've started on the bomb, I can get a picture of in my mind where the fish are and how they're feeding. And if I do get liners here or don't, then it tells me if there's any fish close in or not. So I think that was a slight indication, so there might be, there you go, might be a silverfish actually, not what we're after. But it's something. On a cold winter's day, they still add up. Nice little skimmer. We'll have another go. Hopefully that might have stirred a few carp in the area to have a look. Same again, a few cubes of meat. If them silverfish are being a bit of a nuisance, I might up the feed a little bit, maybe introduce a bit of corn. Same again, lay it in. I've got a marker on the far bank, being nice and accurate, setting a little trap there. But obviously we are making a bit of noise with cameras and everything, so we might not catch here, but hopefully that longer line will come into play. But I'm not going to feed that to begin with, because I don't want to push the fish away. A lot of time in winter you can feed an area peg and it'll just sort of spook the fish really. They're not coming to lots of feed. Obviously they've fed themselves up in the warmer months, so they don't have to move around and feed so much in winter, and they don't feed so much in winter. It can be a bit hit and miss. A lot of the times they're shoaled up in areas, you know, that they'll look for the warmest parts of the lake, and they're huddled together in shoals, and it's just about finding where they are a lot of the time. You don't necessarily need to feed a lot of bait. So I think those indications before were silverfish. I'm not getting any at the minute. I'll just give it 10 minutes or so. If we don't catch a carp, we'll just ship out onto the longer line. Same again. If we catch a couple there and it goes quiet, we could try the bomb line. And initially I'm not going to feed anything on the bomb line. I'm just going to chuck around and look for line bites. But I'm going to play it by ear a little bit. I might choose one part of my peg to feed, and then leave the rest of it to sort of search around and find the fish. And then later on in the day they might come to that one spot that I've been feeding. So whether that's the long pole line, I might catapult a bit of meat out there while I'm fishing a bomb, or it might be sort of a 20 metre line on the bomb that I can fish later on in the session. A lot of time you find when the light sort of dims down a bit at sort of 3 o'clock or so, they have a little bit of feed before it gets dark. In a minute, no indication short. I'm going to give it 10 minutes and then have a go on that longer line. Right, I've given this line 10 minutes or so now. I've had one skim and a few indications. I'm sure if I left it long enough I would start catching carp, but we're looking at a match situation and I wouldn't waste too much time here. And, I mean, on a lot of venues I wouldn't even consider fishing this line middle of winter. They're going to move away from the disturbance we're making. So I'm going to look to fish that long pole now. I'm going to do exactly the same. Just set a little trap. Hopefully there's just a few fish that are lurking a bit further out, away from all the disturbance, and possibly in a bit more warmer water as well, because obviously it's been cold overnight. They might just be huddled together in a little warm spot out there. So small cab pot again, just repeat the process. Hopefully there's a few fish lurking out further. So cube of meat on, get my pot, start with 4 or 5 pieces, and let's see if there's any a bit further out. So same rig as before, it's just literally just 14.5 metres, nice comfortable distance. Going to be waiting a long time for bites in the middle of winter possibly, so might as well be comfortable. There's no point fishing 16 metres, but by doing this I've also got the option of going a bit further out again by fishing 16. See if we get a bite. So again, I've got a marker on the far bank, trying to be nice and accurate. lower the rig in over the top of that bait. Nice little trap. Hopefully there's just a few fish lurking a bit further out. Got a black tip on this time because there's white water in front of me. Just helps me see it. The wind's a little bit awkward, but I've got that back shot to hold on to. Keep the float nice and still. It's not towing at the minute, but it's important to keep an eye on which way it does tow, because often when you're using baits like meat, they can move down with the tow. On some days you can catch sort of a metre, even a metre and a half down the peg away from where you fed, just where that bait's trundled along the bottom. It's holding nice and still there at the minute. Again, I've also got the option of a bomb line. A few little indication there, might be one there. I've got the option of a bomb line after this. I'm hoping to catch a few fish here. I mean, if it is good, you could stay on this line all day, but it's just about picking a few fish off and working your way out. I'm not going to feed a bomb line straight away because I want to catch on this line first, and by feeding on that line it might stop the fish coming close to me. So it's just about catching what you can, working your way out and finding where the fish are without upsetting them too much. That wind's a bit awkward now. Lay the rig back in again over my spot. I mean, it could be that I can catch a fish here. If I stop catching, I could plumb a new line further out or off to the side, wherever I think the fish are. I mean, if the anglers to the right of me are catching, it's worth sort of plumbing up another line a few metres to the right or left, wherever the fish are. There you go. See, they were sat a little bit further out. It didn't take long at all to get that bite, so I can get this fish in and just repeat the process. Hopefully there's a little ball of fish out there that we can catch. Don't tend to fight too hard in winter, so just take your time and they'll come in soon enough. 13 elastic's working nice. There we go. It's a nice looking fish. Little mirror carp. There we go. So that's 4 or 5 pounds. Nice little start. I'm just going to repeat the process again. Cube of meat. A few bits of meat in my pot again. Hopefully that wasn't the only fish there. Normally if you catch one there's got to be a few more, especially this time of year. So repeat the process. Because I've caught one there, I'm going to go in exactly the same spot. Just feed. Lower my rig in. Try and be nice and accurate because we're not feeding a lot of bait. Just want my hook bait in amongst that feed. I had that bite when I was moving the rig around. I just laid it in again, so it might be that the fish has sat off the bottom and they've just followed it down. So if I can get away with it, I might be able to spread that shot out and it might help me get a few more bites. That was an indication then. So it might be worth spreading that bulk of shot out, and then quite often you get a bite on the drop if they are sat off the bottom. That's gone down now. I've got a couple number 12s on my rig just to sort of fine tune it. At the minute it's just like a little dimple, but I might have to take one of them number 12s off just so I can see it a little better. That ripple's making it a little bit awkward, so it's always worth having a few trimming shots so you can mess around with it during the day. And if there are a lot of fish in the peg, a lot of liners, it's worth having a bit of tip showing. I'd say at the minute it's probably sat a little bit too low, so I'm going to take off one of them number 12s. I can still see it nicely though, so hopefully we can catch a fish first. Another little liner there, I think. There we go. So there's obviously one or two fish further out. So if this was a match, keep ticking over. Keep down the same line as long as I'm getting bites, there's no need to move. Just take your time. Obviously in winter you need every fish to count, so there's no point rushing. There we go. Slightly bigger than the last one. Another nice condition fish. Looks like he's never been caught. There we go. So there's two fish for 10 and 12 pound in just a few minutes. It's a brilliant start on a cold days like today. So repeat the process again. A few cubes of meat in there. What I might do actually this time while I'm thinking about it is I'm going to spread that shot out, because we did have a few fish as it settled, so I'm going to spread that bulk out a little bit. It's bait in the pot. Just by having that spread shot, just might get you a couple extra bites in a day, but those couple of extra bites is sort of 12-15 pound on your weight really, so it's worth making the little changes. It's not towing too much, so I can just about get away with it. So feed again, same spot, lift the rig over, just slowly lower it in over that spot so it's nice and accurate. Keep an eye on the float straight away, 'cause we might get an indication as it's dropping through. That's on the bottom now. That was a little indication. So something's come to that bait straight away. Just going to lift and drop it about a foot or so off the bottom now and again. Often that little bit of movement, they snatch at it, just lets them know it's there. Ooh, that might have been an indication. See, in winter, if you get any sort of tiny positive little bite, it's worth striking at, because a lot of the time the bites can be tiny. So it is worth having your float dotted down as far as you can. So hopefully we'll keep catching on this line for the time being. If it does sort of fade out, might be worth chucking a bomb and looking for line bites, trying to find out where the fish are. And then hopefully later on in the match or the session, they'll have a proper feed and they'll come on the pole lines or wherever I've chosen to feed. We have got a cold wind coming off our back, so it might be that they are sat out the wind and sat on this bank, or they might follow it. It is quite mild today. Obviously the lakes were froze, well, a few days ago really, last week, so it might be that they are following the winds, because the water temperature is going to be probably colder than the air temperature at the minute, so it might be cold for us, but it might be slightly warmer for them. So it's taken a bit longer to get a bite this time. Already I'm thinking, well, if they move slightly, so I'm going to give it sort of 5 minutes. I'll feed again on this line. If we don't get indications, I'll just move to the side or wherever I think the fish have gone. Might be that they've moved to the right slightly, so it's worth starting again. Because we're not feeding a lot of bait, you can sort of get away with that and move around the peg a little bit and find where the fish want to be. So there's another one on the long line. It's been quite good this time. It's been good to get some bites, especially this time of year, especially with it being so cold. But just notice the bites are sort of fading a little bit. We've caught a few fish there, and I'm starting to think about moving on to a bomb line. I think initially I'm just going to have a few casts, sort of maybe halfway to the far bank, not all the way. See if I get any liners. See if I can find where there's a few fish. And then I think, because the wind's off my back and it is quite hard to present a long pole line, I am actually going to ping a bit of meat into a spot, maybe off to the right somewhere. And I just feel like the fish might sort of congregate over that line and feed. Oh, it's a nice great big common there. So yeah, by feeding that bomb line, not too far, it just gives me a lot of space that I can cast around to. It's a nice fish, that is. Without messing my peg up. Obviously it is still cold, they're not going to want a lot of bait, but by just having that line somewhere in my peg, it just gives me that chance of catching a lot of fish later on in the session if they do have a bit of a feed. So yeah, I'm going to put this away. Pick up my bomb rod. Obviously I've got a few options, a few coloured pieces of meat, but to begin with I'm just going to hair rig normal piece of meat like I've been using on the pole line. Got a nice longish hair, which, like I said before, helps get a decent hook hold. So just a straight piece of meat. Got my needle there and a Corum quick stop. Longish hair. Hopefully we can find a few fish. So I'm just going to chuck about halfway across. There, I've got a 10 gram ICM bomb, which borderline is probably a little bit too light. Might be worth changing to a 20, but at the minute that line's sinking alright without moving the bomb. So I've got a 1 ounce tip on there. Just going to set it. Oh, there's a bite. Yeah, like I said, I've got a 1 ounce tip, so I can see indications, but that pulled the rod right round, so I didn't need to worry. But obviously the lighter tip just gives away where the fish are. I can keep an eye on my rod. Loosen my clutch there. If I am getting a lot of line bites but I'm not catching, then it's worth coming a bit closer, because that means the fish are somewhere between the bomb and me, and that's why it's worth keeping an eye on what your tip's doing. So line bites are going to be sort of slow pulls and drop backs where the fish are just rubbing against the line. Normally in winter, bites are still sort of unmissable really. You get a pull round like that, or maybe a rattle and then a drop back where it goes slack and runs towards you. So I've had that fish halfway across. Because I've caught that fish there, I'm obviously going to chuck in the same spot again until I stop catching, and then it's worth just about finding where the fish are again. So I've got a reasonably soft rod, size 16 GPM, Clutch is working nicely, just taking my time. No need to rush this time of year. Ooh. Lovely coloured fish, that one. That's a beautiful fish. Probably not going to be able to hold him up, but see if I can show you. Ooh. There we go. Look at the colours of that. Nice linear carp. The sun's come out too. See if we can get another. So exactly the same again. I've caught on a normal colour piece of meat, so there's no need to change. But I will have a little play with the other colours. Obviously they've got a bit more flavour to them as well. If I'm not catching, it's just I've got so much confidence in sort of yellow and pink meat for some reason. Whether it's the flavour of the haze or I don't know, just catch a lot of fish on that. But for now, exactly the same again. I didn't clip up or anything, but I've got a decent idea where that fish was caught. Same again. I'll try and feather it when it hits the water. That's really important that you don't make too much of a splash. Then I just gently tighten up until there's a slight bend in the tip. That's important as well because you need to be able to see all these indications. So there was a liner straight away. So I'm obviously in the right area. I think what's happened, we've caught them fish on the pole line and they've just sort of backed off a little bit. So might even be, there's a line bite, so it might even be worth coming a bit closer again, sort of 18 metres out, and then just sort of working my way out. So I'm getting liners as soon as I've chucked in there, so the likelihood is they're quite close to me. So because I've had that indication and I've got an idea where the fish are, I'm not going to feed at the minute until they sort of back off a little bit, because like I said, I don't want to ruin my chances of catching on this line to begin with. But if they do back off, I've got a few options. I've got the far bank to cast to. I could even try bomb and bread, though the water is a little bit coloured for that. I am seeing the odd fish topping tight in on the far bank, so they might be up in the water, so it might be worth a shout. Or I could fish a little icy, another line bite, I could fish an ICM method and create a little pile of bait and set a trap and just be nice and patient. And what I haven't done is set my stopwatch. That's an important thing to do as well, because a lot of time in winter it's hard to sort of have an idea of how much time has passed on each cast. So by setting a stopwatch, you know how long it's been in that spot. If it's been in the water 10 minutes, the likelihood is it's in the wrong spot. So it's worth keeping an eye on the stopwatch. Also, you might find that the bites come sort of, I don't know, let's say after 5 or 6 minutes of it being in the water, and then you know then if it's gone say 10 minutes, you know, it's worth to have a recast somewhere else and move. But when you are fishing a feeder or even bread, sometimes you do find there is a pattern to the bite. How long it takes to get a bite, 7 minutes, 12 minutes, they sort of come roughly at the same time, so it is worth having the stopwatch with you. So there's a liner there again, there's still fish there, that might be a bite. There we go. A strange bite. But I'm obviously in the right spot at the minute because it didn't take too long. Although I think on the next cast, because I did get a lot of line bites before that fish, I will come a little bit shorter. And by doing that, I haven't got a line going across my peg and spooking fish potentially, but when they do swim into it and rub against it. But Nice to have a few bites on a winter's day anyway. So don't fight too hard this time of year, just gentle nods of the head. Clutch is nice and slack, I'm not bullying fish, just taking my time. There we go. Another comment. Nice hook hold there in the corner of the mouth. So on this cast, because I was getting line bites there, or lots of line bites, I'm just going to come a little bit closer. Hopefully we get an even quicker bite. So I'm going to try and cast a little bit closer. Feather it when it hits the water because I don't want to scare those fish. There we go, a few metres closer. Be interesting to see if we get the same amount of line bites now. Although it sounds strange, it would be a good thing if we don't get so many line bites because it means the bomb's in the right area if there is a ball of fish there. So nice gentle bend in the tip, not too much because I need to see those indications. Got the rod pointing slightly towards the fish, that way if I do get a drop back I can pick the line up quite quickly, and if I do get an aggressive bite it's just going to hook itself really. A lot of the time there's no need to strike or anything aggressively, you just pick the rod up because the fish is on a lot of the time. See, I'm not getting any line bites this time. Might be the fish have moved or I am in the right spot. See, if it goes sort of 5-10 minutes or so without a bite, just go back to that original spot or go a bit further, left or right. Just keep searching around the peg. I've clipped up to the far bank at the start of the match, so there's no fear of hooking the far bank, and I do have that option of following right the way to the bank. And when the sun does come out eventually, I might find that those fish are in shallow water, so that might be a good option. That sun will just warm that shallow water up a little bit, and it might be where the fish want to be. Right, so we've had a few fish on the bottom. It's been quite good actually because we found like a little ball of fish, but it seemed to have dispersed a little bit when we've caught a few. Yellow meat's been quite good as well. So I think what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pick a spot that I'm going to feed, and I think what I'm going to do actually is feed the spot that I was catching on. These fish have probably gone to the left or right, or maybe on the far bank. So what I'm going to do now is start pinging sort of 4 or 5 pieces of meat every few minutes or so over that spot that I did catch on. I've had a few casts around that area and caught a few fish, so they have sort of spread out a little bit. But I'm hoping by feeding that little area, I've got nothing to lose really, and I'm hoping they're going to come back over that spot and start feeding. So, got my catapult, 4 or 5 pieces of meat, just using 7mm. The wind's off my back, but if it was a bit windier, I'd have some 8mm with me. As I've done that, I'm starting to get line bites, so might even be one on. No. So that obviously stirred a bit of a response. Just going to chuck right in amongst that feed, see if I can snare one of those fish. Might just been a coincidence that I started getting line bites, but I went a few casts without any indications then, and I started feeding. So it might be they are coming to a bit of bait. So same again, a few cubes of meat over the top. Just being careful not to feed too much, because that's the other thing, too much bait can have the adverse effect and can push fish away again. But I'm only sort of feeding sort of halfway across really. It obviously gives me space to try on the back of the feed to the left or right, or later on if it doesn't work at all, there might be a few fish to be caught on the method feeder. But I've left that far bank alone, so it's always sort of a safe spot that I can try and nick a fish. And with a method feeder you can be a bit more patient, set a trap. Got that pile of micro pellets there with your hook bait on the top, and you can just sit and wait for a fish to come along. Ooh, that was a little sharp bite, so that's a good sign that the fish are coming to a bit of feed. And what I could also do, obviously we had a few fish on the pole earlier, it might just be that it needed a bit of a rest. So by resting the pole line, I can drop back onto it, maybe ship out and cup in sort of 4 or 5 cubes every now and again to keep it going. And just by resting it, it might be that I can catch on that line later on, especially when the fish sort of gain a bit more confidence. There's not many anglers on the lake, so they will push away from disturbance. See, we're making a bit of a racket walking along the bank, but yeah, just by feeding this meat halfway across, it gives me the chance of catching a few fish. I had another indication then, so it's obviously the right thing to do, is sort of drawing a few fish in, because the few casts before that I wasn't getting any line bites. So I'm just tightening the tip so it's got a slight bend and I can see what's going on. And I think this might be the way forward. Obviously I could catapult a bit of feed on the pole line as well, but it's just not quite as accurate as shipping out and potting a bit of bait every now and again. So if it was a match, that's probably what I'd be doing. Oh, there's one. I thought it was anyway. So it's a good sign again. Just check my hook, sharp, yeah. Might have just been an aggressive line bite, fish charging into my line. I'll try again. There we go, that was a bit to the left, that one. We'll give it a few minutes, see what happens. It's important not to have too many casts when you're winter fishing, because you don't want to push the fish out your peg. And a bomb hitting the water isn't exactly a natural thing for them. There we go. Keep a little bit of bait going in, 2-3 pieces over the top. We'll sit and wait. Ooh. There we go, that's another fish in the feed. It's definitely worked picking that line and pinging a few pieces of meat. Feels like a better fish as well. So it's paid off. Hopefully we get a few more fish on this line. And if it stops, we'll swap and change to the pole line. Maybe have a little chuck on the method. So that far bank's been left alone for when I need it. Oh, yeah, that's a better fish. Yellow bit of meat hanging out its mouth as well. It's quite a good looking fish actually. See if we can hold it up. There we go. Put him back. Before I go out, actually, just ping a bit more meat over the top. Hopefully bring a few fish back in after that disturbance. I'll try again. Since that was on the yellow, I'll stick with it. Just a quick stop, through the meat, out the back. There we go. In amongst that feed, feather it, nice little plop. Started getting a few more line bites and indications now as well. So now it's going later in the day, the sun's coming out as well. They're having a bit of a feed, I think, now. Starting to switch on. Like I said earlier, that sun hitting that far bank might be warming that up as well, so I might have a go in the shallow water later on. Either on a method or bomb and bread. Just another option in case, you know, the fishing tails off a little bit, but at the minute we found a few more fish. And I can also drop onto the pole line as well, just swap and change. There's one. Yeah, so I found a few fish again now. Obviously it's a match, you don't really come off feeding fish, but you know, we've got that option of either going on the pole line or further across to the far bank. And a lot of time in winter it's about sort of keeping your options open and not scaring the fish away too much. Feels like another nice fish. Might even be worth feeding the short pole line if the fishing does switch on. But I'm quite happy catching these at the minute. Lovely fish. Right, since that worked on the fish before, I'll try feeding again before I cast out. Get my needle in my quick stop. Another piece of yellow. See if we can get another quick fish. I think that sun out just sort of warms the water a little bit and they have a bit of a feed. Because it is bitterly cold, especially when that sun goes in. It's just lovely to catch a few fish, especially when it's so cold. It's really rewarding when you do find them. Keep a bit of bait going in. Not too much though. Hopefully get a few more before we go home. Right, so I've had a brilliant little session on the bomb now. Because this sun's been out, I fancy a little chuck on the method across. Because that shallow water's been warmed by the sun, I just fancy a few fish over there. So what I've done, obviously I've clipped up earlier to the far bank. In a minute I've got my bomb set up, so I'm going to take my quick change bead, take my hook length off, save that for if I go back on it. Take my bomb off, so it just slides off. Pick up a 28 gram ICM method. That's clipped on, ready to go. And then I need a short hook length, so I've got some ready tied. Go for an 0.13 to a 16 GPM there. Slip one of those onto my quick change bead and I'm ready to go. So seconds it takes to change tactics. Prepared my micros earlier, just soaked them for 2 minutes, strained them off and they're perfect. So on the hook, obviously with the water being coloured, I'm going for a bright pink band and wafter straight onto the band. If I can do it with my cold hands. There we go. A nice wafter on the hook. I've got my mould there, ready to go. So a few micros in the mould. Hook bait over the top. A few more micros. Feeder in the mould. Nice squeeze. There we go. My hook bait's concealed inside. So they'll break down and my wafter will be sat there on top of that pile hopefully. So with a bit of luck, it shouldn't take too long. So I'm going to cast, hit the clip. That's really tight. In fact, that's too tight. I think it's gone over a reed, so I'm going to have a recast. There we go. There's a few reeds hanging in the water there, so I'm going to have a quick recast. Same again, fill the mould, hook bait over the top, more pellets. Nice little squeeze. There we go. Cast out, rod back, hit the clip. That's gone in a bit better. Sink the line into the rest. Hopefully that doesn't take too long. So I've got a bit of a crosswind here, which is why I'm on the 28 gram, just to sort of hold bottom against that slope a bit more. So when you've got a crosswind and the line's floating, it adds a lot of pressure, so it's important to hold the bottom with a heavier feeder. What I've been doing also is carrying on pinging a little bit of meat over my bomb line as well. But what I've been doing throughout the day is topping up my pole line with half a dozen pieces every now and again. Not lots of bait, just keep a little bit of bait going in, ready for when I do feel like I need to change and come back onto it. So if this doesn't work now, I fancy a few fish on the pole line to end the session. I just feel like the fish might come close in again later on in the day. The sun's warming it up a little bit more. I just feel like the fish might be a little bit more active, which is what winter fishing is all about really. You've got to play it by ear a little bit, keep your options open. Nice simple tactics, keep yourself warm, and hopefully we'll catch a few fish. That's what I didn't do then, is set my stopwatch. When you feed it fishing, you often find you get a bit of a pattern. Bites might come after 7 minutes, 12 minutes, so I was about a minute behind then, I think. I'm not expecting to get a bite straight away, but maybe I'll leave it out there for 10 minutes or so. If it doesn't happen, then I'll come back on the pole line or the bomb, swap and change, try and keep in contact with the fish, keep catching. But we've had a brilliant session so far, so even if they're not in that shallow water, we've had a brilliant day. Hopefully we get a few on the pole to finish if this doesn't work. We have had a few bites on the method feeder. We've had 2 or 3 smaller carp. Here's another one. Had a few skimmers as well, but I've noticed the fish have a smaller stamp on the feeder, so I think after I land this fish, I think what I'm going to do is going to go back on the pole line. Obviously it's later in the day now, sun's going down a little bit, and I've been priming that long pole line with just sort of half a dozen cubes in a pot every now and again. And I've just got a feeling they might have a little feed on that pole line later on in the day. Saying that, this is a slightly better fish, so you know, if it was a match, then the feeder would obviously be an option to go back on it every now and again. But like I said, I did have to wait quite a long time for these bites. I'm hoping when we do go on the pole, we get a few fish, a late little flurry to finish, and then the session. That's a nice carp. Nice little bonus somewhere else in my peg anyway. Catch those fish. I think I'm going to put this down now. I'm hoping there's a few fish on the pole line ready for me to catch. So exactly the same as before. Nice cube of meat. Few in my pot, set a nice little trap. With a bit of luck, won't take too long to get a bite. So I've been topping it up every now and again, every sort of 10-15 minutes, just half a dozen cubes. Hopefully there's a few fish in the area that are sort of coming in and out of the peg. So, far bank marker, lay my rig over the top of the feed. Let's see what happens. The sun's out now, it's feeling a little bit warmer than it was. Just got a feeling that these fish might come closer in, even though this wind is making it a bit awkward. Hopefully we can get one or two fish on this, and that'll end the session nicely. I think that was a little line bite then, so I think there's 1 or 2 fish in the peg. It's towing a little bit more this time actually. I'm actually going to lay my rig in slightly to the left, down toe of where I've fed that bait. Hopefully that's right in amongst where the bait is. Oh, another indication then. Looked like a bite, but I think it was a line bite. So, lay my rig in again. Wind's making it awkward, but got that back shot there to keep the float still. Must be 1 or 2 fish in the area. You know, in a match situation, it's about weighing up, seeing how long it takes to catch a fish and what your catch rate is on each line and whether you need to rest lines. I mean, we were catching quite well on this line earlier on today. I'm just wondering if giving it that bit of a rest has brought them back in again. Oh, another indication. Don't think it's going to take long. There we go. So that was a nice quick bite really. Hopefully when I get this fish in, go back out there, set my trap again. It won't take too long to catch another fish. Coming into that time of day now where they've got a bit more confidence. They're getting used to all the noise and disturbance on the bank. And they have a bit of a feed. There we go. Nice fish, got a bit of a ghosty in him. So same again, see if we can end the session with another nice fish on the pole. Straight back out there. Hopefully there's a little ball of fish out there just waiting for me. So same again, nice and accurate on the same marker. Caught that fish slightly to the left because it was towing a bit, so I'm going to do the same again, lay my rig into the left of where I fed. So there we go. Not the intended species, it's a skimmer this time, but middle of winter, not going to moan at catching a 10-ounce fish. Strange how quickly it changes. Earlier we were getting rained on and now there's hardly a cloud in the sky. There we go, not a bad fish. of time winter fishing's about swapping and changing lines really. Catch a few fish on each line. It's not all about bagging this time of year, it's just about keeping all your lines going, keeping your options open. Oh, that was a quick bite. So although we did have that skimmer, there was a carp out there waiting for me pretty much straight away. I doubt that feed even hit the bottom. Or maybe it followed it down. Nice chunky fish. I reckon maybe one more fish and we call it a day. So there we go. Couldn't resist one more fish. What's been a brilliant day. Full credit to Todber. The lakes were frozen just a few days ago and we've had a brilliant day on a range of tactics. Caught on the pole, the bomb and the feeder. I think that'll be the last fish. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching. You've learnt a few hints, tips and tricks to help you catch in the cold. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.